Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, the race to be the next president of Iran is down to two.
We are now heading into a runoff, and there is a clear choice presenting itself to the people.
So why are so many voters deciding to stay home? I'm Kevin Hirten, and this is The Take. On Friday, Iran held a snap election to see who would replace former President Ibrahim Raisi. Raisi was killed in a helicopter crash on May 19th. Friday's election saw a record low turnout.
It's only the second time there's been a presidential runoff in Iran since the 1979 revolution. There was a record low turnout of 40%.
And none of the four candidates secured a majority, which means the top two candidates are now headed for a runoff that will take place on Friday. Joining us now is Maziar Motamedi. He's a Tehran-based journalist who's covered the voting for Al Jazeera. Maziar, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't we start with the biggest surprise on Friday, which was just how few people turned out to vote. What explains the bad turnout?
Yes, so the first time 60% of eligible Iranian voters chose to stay home and not vote. And that's also surprisingly left a reformist candidate on top. It didn't give him a victory, but sending the runoff with a reformist on the top and then followed by the hardliner. So that was very unexpected. There were expectations of low turnout, but just not this low. 40% is unprecedented, both in terms of presidential elections and parliamentary elections. The election that got President Raisi into office 3 years ago, that was 48%. And the parliamentary election just a few months ago, that was just below 41%. So this changes everything. And it's the first time this is happening since 1979.
So this is the lowest turnout since the last time we had an election. Let's talk about the two men who will be facing off on July 5th. You have the so-called moderate, who is Masoud Pezeshkian, and the hardliner Saeed Jalili.
Reformist Masoud Pezeshkian won the most votes, but still fell short of that majority. Ultra-conservative Saeed Jalili came in second.
Who are they, and how did they both wind up in this runoff?
Pezeshkian is a longtime lawmaker. He used to be a heart surgeon and a health minister. And he has been a prominent lawmaker, known person, but not quite at this level. And it's for the first time that he's really coming up and has a chance of becoming president. He's a moderate who's backed by former presidents, reformists, senior reformist figures. And on the other hand, you have Saeed Jalili, who's a hardliner who has amassed this following of ultra-conservatives. And he blames the reformist government for the country's pains right now. And he says he has plans to fix it.
I've noticed a lot of the coverage uses these terms, moderate or reformist versus hardliner. Can you just give us a little bit more information on exactly what those terms mean when it comes to what positions that these candidates back?
Well, Iranian elections have traditionally set reformist or moderate candidates against hardliners at different levels, but they have some similarities, including that they are loyal to the establishment, especially during this election cycle as well. During the debates, they've been readily and quickly supporting the supreme leader and pledging allegiance to him and the stability of the system. But on the other hand, they differ in their methods. For instance, the reformist lines include better relations with the West through restoring the nuclear deal that Iran signed with world powers in 2015, that Donald Trump left in 2018, and lifting sanctions, along with having relations across the region and with the East. But on the other hand, the hardline camp is more pessimistic about this and advocates a stronger stance against the West and imperialism. They're more closer to Russia and China. So I think Russia and China would also be happier if there's a President Jalili in office soon.
Most people don't realize just how intricate and complicated Iran's political system is. There's a parliament, but there's also a council of ministers, and there's the supreme leader. So I guess the question is, what exactly is this job that these two men are vying for? What does the president of Iran do exactly?
Yes, the supreme leader has the final say on everything. And then there's the Guardian Council, this 12-member constitutional body whose members are directly and indirectly selected by the supreme leader. And then there's the parliament, which devises laws, passes them onto this Guardian Council, which has to greenlight them and then send them to the government for implementation. So the president does have power, especially considering who is surrounding the president and how influential those people are in South Iran's other unelected bodies, like other councils like the Expediency Council or the Supreme National Security Council.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, the president does have power, but he does have to navigate this complicated system, which have different factions and different players, which altogether come under the supreme leader.
Mm. Give me a sense of what an election day is like in Iran. I think everyone has their own version of going to the polls, but is there anything interesting or dynamic about the Iranian election day experience you can share with us?
Well, there is always this competitiveness, more or less, except for the previous election when there was a clear winner, President Raisi. And especially in this round too, it came somewhat unexpected because at first there were only 6 candidates and people were disillusioned. Not many people were expected to go to vote. But at the end of the day, we are now heading into a runoff and there is a clear choice presenting itself to the people. If many more people turn up, then Pezeshkian does stand a better chance. But if not, still this whole thing is up in the air. It's still very unclear, especially after that 40% turnout number, which nobody saw the extent of it. So it is interesting, but very different from previous elections where there was a much more hope, there was much more energy around it. Now, the rhetoric has changed. Now it's more, Pezeshkian is not going to perform any miracles. He's not going to suddenly improve everything. He might be able to gradually and marginally improve things. But if you choose Saeed Jalili, then he's going to make things much more worse. That's the line that's coming from the Pezeshkian camp even. So that's where we are.
How will Iran's economy affect this election? That's after the break. So Maziar, the major issue in this campaign appears to be the economy. So you're in Tehran. Can you give us a sense of just what it's like there, how much people are struggling, especially with this crazy inflation?
Yeah, Iran's economy has been dealing with rampant inflation for decades, and the causes are known. It's rampant money printing and mismanagement and corruption and sanctions. But especially in the past 5-6 years since the withdrawal of the US from the nuclear deal and the imposition of basically every sanction that they could, the whole situation has gotten much worse. And we've been dealing with a nonstop over 40% inflation for the past few years. At times it has been over 60%. But at the end of the day, that's just a number.
Living standards, particularly among the middle class, have worsened in recent years. Skilled workers are leaving, and there is little prospect for foreign investment because of sanctions.
One day you find yourself thinking, hey, I bought this thing just last year for a third of the price it is today. And worst thing is that next year you're going to have to pay 3 times as much. So that cumulative effect is also really pressuring people. And housing is not affordable. There's high unemployment. There's a perennial budget deficit. So yeah, the economy is definitely not doing good. And there is no prospect of significantly improving it in the short term either.
So it appears the economy is top of mind. And hey, look, domestic issues usually dominate elections like this. But in this case, it's actually Iran's foreign policy that is at least partially to blame for the economic problems. As you said, the sanctions are taking an enormous toll. Do you think voters are making that connection? And do you think the results of this election could have any discernible effect on Iran's foreign policy and those sanctions moving forward?
Yes, when I was out on election day, I actually spoke to a couple of 18-year-old boys who thought exactly this. They thought Pezeshkian has a slightly better chance of improving foreign relations, improving relations with the West. So he has a better chance of lifting sanctions. So he has a better chance of managing the economy. While on the other hand, Saeed Jalili used to be Iran's top nuclear negotiator for years. And during those years, Iran was targeted with UN Security Council sanctions that really pushed the economy to the brink. So for some people, yes, it is a clear choice. And I think for people in governments from watching from abroad, also this represents a very clear choice in terms of how and where Iran's foreign relations are going to be heading. But at the same time, if Pezeshkian wins, it doesn't automatically mean that the nuclear deal is going to be restored or the sanctions are going to be lifted. There's a very complicated process ahead, both in terms of nuclear talks and regional talks, and in terms of how successful Pezeshkian can be inside Iran, because let's not forget that the parliament is still being run by Mohammed who is running in the election against Pezeshkian and who is very much a candidate of the Revolution Front. So a lot of things could happen, a lot of factors are at play, and there's really no telling where this is going to be going. But the two candidates do represent very different approaches.
Right. And there's two men who aren't on the ballot or not even in Iran who are probably having a huge impact on this election. And that's Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And there's a lot of really interesting implications to how those two men and their possible presidencies could affect this election.
So today we're basically where we were several years ago. The sanctions are still there. They're being piled up little by little. But yes, the administration in the US does also represent a different viewpoint. The Biden administration still does regard the JCPOA as an achievement and does want to see it restored in name at least.
Will the 2015 nuclear deal be back on the table? State Department spokesperson Ned Price said that US is ready to re-engage in meaningful diplomacy with Iran.
But I think there are no real prospects of that happening in the short term because hundreds of sanctions, Iran's nuclear inspections, a lot of tensions with the International Atomic Energy Agency. But yeah, if there's a Trump presidency, then things are going to be more confrontational. And then if there's a Jalili presidency in Iran, then the same is going to happen.
So the economic situation really does sound dire. And oftentimes that will lead to like a fired up citizenry, right? A big turnout, big appetite for change. But your reporting indicates that there's a high degree of apathy from voters, right? Like they've lost faith that any vote they cast will materially improve their life at all. Do you think this is a sign of like a real change in attitudes or just a continuation of a trend that's been at work for some time?
Yeah, this has been happening with the situation getting worse in the past few years. We've seen it in presidential election, in parliamentary election, and we've seen it especially in the aftermath of the protests during which new internet restrictions were also imposed. So when you put all of this together, the people are very frustrated, and worst of all, there's no immediate prospect of things getting better. So in the first round, we saw that most people stayed out and they sent a message. But now, especially the reformist camp is acknowledging this, is saying, yes, people are sending a message with this. People are angry. People do not deserve to be treated this way. So it would really be the main issue to watch what the turnout is going to be in the runoff.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by David Enders, Duha Mossad, and Marcos Bartolomé, with Amy Walters, Manahil Naveed, Veronique Eshaya, Mohammed Zain Shafi Zain, and me, Kevin Hirten, in for Malika Bilal. It was edited by Noor Wazwaz. Our sound designer is Alex Roldan. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.